Okay. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Today's discussion, inshallah ta'ala, will be centered around a concept that we find in our religion, and that is never making someone else a priority while you yourself are an option. Meaning, never put someone else first while they don't necessarily put you first. And this is something that, goes on in relationships, goes on in marriages, goes on in so many different spheres of human interaction. And as I'm doing this talk for the sisters, I want the sisters to pay attention to this, because I'm speaking directly to you, because this is something that women do. And sometimes it's, self-validating. You think by investing all of yourself into someone else that somehow, validates who you are. All right. Some people seek validation through, servicing others, and then you end up hurt at the end of the day, because you begin to realize that the other person doesn't make you a priority like you've made them a priority. And that's a problem. That is a problem. That will leave you broken. When you make someone else a priority, you spend your entire life making someone else a priority, and they don't make you a priority. All right. And then when you come to that realization, you start to feel like all that I have invested in this person, and the person doesn't see me the same exact way, and you feel like, invalid. You feel invalid. And this is something that is a part of our religion. There are areas of our religion where we are taught to put ourselves first. Make yourself a priority. Sometimes we get into arguments with one another, and the arguments that we get into with one another, they are actually deeper than, what is on the surface. It's almost like like the person is seeking some type of validation, some deeper validation that they're looking for. And so we go deeper and deeper into arguments, and then you find that there are layers to, this discussion. Like, your argument is really not with me. You're having an argument with me, but your issue is not with me. Your issue is deeper and more rooted in your childhood experiences and other things that have happened to you in your life. And you're just using me to, get that validation. And, it's important that, learning how to self-validate, that helps to rid you of this philosophy of hustling for validation. There's people who hustle for validation. Everything that they do is a hustle in order to make themselves feel more valid. So what I'm saying is that learn how to validate yourself. Learn how to self-validate by putting yourself and your priorities and your needs first, rather than putting someone else's first when to them you are only an option. So I'm going to use as the premise of my discussion a hadith that is authentically reported on the Prophet ﷺ on the authority of Rabi' ibn Ka'b. Rabi' ibn Ka'b al-Aslami. He said, "Kuntu abitu ma'a Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam fa'ataytuhu bi wudu'ihi wa hajatihi." Rabi' ibn Ka'b al-Aslami, much like many of the Sahaba, was, a poor man who didn't have much. He was one of the early converts to Islam, and the Prophet ﷺ was very fond of him. And so Ka'b, Rabi'a, as he's telling this narration, as he's telling the story, he said that I used to service the Prophet ﷺ, meaning I used to bring him his water for wudu, and I used to live with him at his home, and I used to run errands for him, and I used to do things for him. All right, and you have many of the Sahaba that used to do that. Anas ibn Malik, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. You have many of the Sahaba who used to, care for the Prophet ﷺ, run his errands. There's someone's phone that is unmuted, that we can hear the noise in the background. Please mute your phone. So the Prophet ﷺ, one day, he says to Rabi' ibn Ka'b, noticing that he's, constantly spending his life, running errands for him and doing things for him. So he says to Rabi', he says to him one day, فَقَالَ لِي سَلْ فَقُلْتُ أَسْأَلُكَ مُرَافَتَكَ فِي الْجَنَّةِ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. The Prophet ﷺ says, سَلْنِي أُعْتِيكَ. Ask me for anything you want, Rabi', and I'll give it to you. Ask me for whatever you want, and I'll give it to you. Meaning, I will call on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make that happen for you. All right? I'll call on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make that happen for you. This is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam using his position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help somebody else. All right, that is the ultimate level of selflessness. The ultimate level of selflessness is to use the position that you believe you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help someone else. How often have we seen a Muslim struggling with some particular aspect of Islam, and those of us who see ourselves to be, mashallah, so self-righteous, right? You have so many, religious people. I'm not talking about spiritual people. I'm talking about religious people, people who validate themselves through, the performance of the ritualistic practices of the religion, right? You see yourself as valid, or you see yourself as being, self-righteous because of your ability to carry out the rituals of Islam, right? These are some of the most self-righteous. These are some of the worst people, man. And they exist in every religion, man. And we have a ton of them in Islam. These self-righteous individuals who, because you have managed to navigate your way to a place where performing the rituals of the religion is very easy for you. All right, and make no mistake about it, just because you go through the rituals of Islam doesn't necessarily mean that you are a righteous person. All right? Doesn't mean that you are a righteous person. You're just regimented. Some people, their whole lives are set up like that. They're very easy to position into being regimented. All right, you put them in a position, you put them in a place, and they'll follow the rituals of that particular thing. We do it when we work on jobs, right? We go to a job. They say you got to dress like this. You got to be here at this time. You got to do this, job description. You have to fulfill this job description. And we do that well. We get employee of the month, employee of the year. You understand what I'm saying? Like we get raises. We move up in levels. That's how we have been regimented here in America. This is our society. This is who we are as Americans. So now to take that same mentality and go into a religion and become regimented in a religion where you're fasting the month of Ramadan, you're making your 5 daily prayers, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a righteous person. Make no mistake about that. That doesn't mean that you are a righteous person because you can follow the rituals of Islam and you seem to have the rituals down packed, right? That doesn't mean that you are a righteous person. That just means that you're someone who has managed, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have managed to, to condition yourself to be regimented. That's all that means. The religious part, the spiritual part of it, as if you look at every single act of worship that we have in Islam, the reward is contingent on how God conscious you are in that act of worship. All right? It's not about the act itself. You understand? Your reward in Islam, our reward in Islam for the deeds, the acts of worship that we do, is not contingent on the performance of the act. I'll give you 2 examples. Let's take salat and let's take fasting. Since Ramadan is, we're coming upon the cusp of Ramadan. Let's look at that. Let's look at prayer, right? The most important act of worship in our religion after the Shahada, right? And there are people who go through the mechanics of the prayer, but you still get no reward for it, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, ربما لعل العبد أن ينصرف من صلاته ولا يكتب له إلا نصفها أو ثلثها أو ربعها أو خمسها أو سدسها إلى آخره. He said that perhaps a person may leave out of his prayer and the only thing that he has written for him as a reward is half of it, a third of it, a fourth of it, a fifth of it. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's not about the performance of the act itself. It's not about the performance of the act itself. It's about how conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how God conscious you are in your prayer. Khushu'. The man entered into the masjid. Hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. The man entered into the masjid and he performs 2 rak'ah. And then he walks over to the Prophet ﷺ and gives the Prophet the greeting of salam. The Prophet says, Wa alayka salam, irja' fasalli fa innaka lam tusalli. The Prophet ﷺ tells him, go back and pray again because you didn't pray. What was he missing? And this happened 3 times. 3 times the Prophet ﷺ told him, irja' fasalli fa innaka lam tusalli. Go back and pray again because you didn't pray. What was it that he was doing wrong? Until the point where the man said to the Prophet ﷺ, وَالَّذِي بَعْثَكَ بِالْحَقِّ لَا أُحْسِنُ غَيْرَهَا فَعَلِّمْنِي الصَّلَاةَ. He said, I swear by the one who sent you with the truth, I don't know how to pray any better than you have seen me praying. Teach me how to pray. And the Prophet ﷺ began to instruct him, and he told him, when you go into ruku', taraka hatta tatma'inna raki'an. Go into ruku' in the bowing position until you are in a state of tranquility while you are bowing. And the same thing in sujood. And the point is that there was a component missing for his prayer, from his prayer, which is why the Prophet ﷺ told him, go back and pray, because you didn't pray. You understand? So our reward for salat is not just going through the mechanics of the prayer. Anybody can go through the mechanics of the prayer. Your reward is contingent on your God consciousness. There's a deeper spiritual level that is what warrants our reward, or the lack thereof. All right? Let's go now with fasting. There are many Muslims who fast, right? Many Muslims who fast. And they go through the ritual of not, taking the suhoor meal and not eating and drinking for the rest of the day, and then breaking the fast with iftar. You understand what I'm saying? They go through the ritual of it. But the Prophet ﷺ told us, he said, مَنْ لَمْ يَدَعْ بِقَوْلِ الزُّورِ وَالْعَمَلَ بِهِ وَالْكَذِبِ فَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ حَاجَ بِأَنْ يَدَعْ طَعَامَهُ وَشَرَابَهُ. The Prophet ﷺ said, he who does not leave off lying and false vain speech, then Allah is not in need of him leaving off his food and his drink, because you are not fulfilling the goal of fasting. The goal of fasting is taqwa. So if you are leaving off food and drink, but you're not attaining taqwa, then you are wasting your time. Allah is not in need of you leaving off your food and your drink. You understand? You see how that works? So it's not about the act itself. It's about a deeper spiritual, it's about a deeper level of God consciousness that warrants the reward that we are seeking from these acts of worship. So all these, I pray 5 times a day, I wear a thobe, I wear a beard and all this stuff. That's cool. But that is not the end all be all. That's not the end goal. And it's sad because a lot of people who convert to Islam, the first thing that they are taught are these things. And so they spend their entire lives, they spend the vast majority of their time as new Muslims making that the end goal. That I can put on a garment, I can, put on a hijab, and I can grow my beard, and I can pray 5 times a day. And there's no God consciousness in any of that. It's just you're going through the mechanics of it. And you're missing the bigger picture. You're missing the bigger picture. So my point is that the Prophet ﷺ, he told Rabi' ibn Ka'b, Salni u'atik. Ask me for anything you want and I will give it to you. Meaning he was willing to use the position that he had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help someone else. That is the ultimate of selflessness. And for those of us who believe that we have a great position with God, then use that great position that you believe that you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to make yourself more superior to others, but to help others level up to where you believe you are, right? Because it's all about perception, right? It's all about perception. It's all about what you perceive yourself to be, and not the reality of it. It's like, oh, I'm on the haq, I'm on the truth, I'm this, I'm that. That's your perception. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly what it is. And, we're taught in our religion not to be self-deceived. Don't be self-deluded, man. So the Prophet ﷺ says to him, ask me for whatever you want, and I'll ask God. I'll ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you. Salni u'atik. And Rabi'a, he said to the Prophet ﷺ, give me a day or two and let me think about what it is I can ask you. The Prophet didn't put any restrictions on it. He said, ask me and I'll give it to you. He didn't put any restrictions on it. So Rabi'a waited for a couple of nights, and then the Prophet ﷺ met him again, and he said to him, Ya Rabi'a, salni u'atik. Ask me for what you want and I'll give you what you want. And he said to the Prophet ﷺ, listen to his request. All he wanted from the Prophet ﷺ, he said, As'aluka marafataka fil jannah. I ask you for your companionship in paradise. That's all I want. I just want to be your companion in paradise. That's all I want. The Prophet ﷺ said, Awa ghayra dhalika. Do you want anything else? That's it. Like, you could have asked me for anything else, You could have asked me for a house. You could have asked me for a date palm tree. You could have asked me for a garden. You could have asked me for a camel. You could have asked me for a wife. You could have asked me for whatever you wanted to ask me for from the dunya. And all you want is to be my companion in paradise? That's it? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Awa ghayra dhalika?" Is there anything else that you want? And Rabi'a, he said, no. All right, someone's phone is unmuted. Please mute your phone. Please mute your phone. And the Prophet ﷺ asked him, "Awa ghayra dhalika?" Do you want anything else? And Rabi'a, he said, "Dhaka, ya Rasulullah." No, only that. Only that. Before we conclude the hadith, because there's a last portion of it, which is the concentration here. Understand from this is that our religion teaches us to have high aspirations, to aspire for greatness. He said, all I want, if we had one request right now, if God said to any one of us right now, ask me for whatever you want, and I'll grant you whatever you want. Most of us would ask for $1 million, for this, for that. You understand what I'm saying? Paradise. The Prophet ﷺ even told one of his companions that when you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Jannah, ask him for al-firdaus al-a'la. Ask him for the highest place in Jannah. Don't settle for mediocrity. Don't settle for just getting into Jannah. Right? Don't just settle for getting into Jannah. He said, ask Allah for the highest place in Jannah. Right? Showing you that our religion teaches us to aspire for greatness. Right? Not to just settle for being mediocre. All right? Aspire for greatness. Stop lowering your standards. We lower our standards and we settle for less. As I mentioned the story of Bani Israel in the khutbah on Friday, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Bani Israel, وَأَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَنَّ وَالسَّلْوَى, that we sent down to you manna and quails, was a type of bird, type of meat that they could eat. كُلُوا مِن طَيِّبَاتِ مَا رَزَقْنَاكُمْ, and eat of the good things that we have provided for you. All right? Then what did Bani Israel say to Musa? They said, قال وإذ قلتم يا موسى لن نصبر على طعام واحد فادع ربك أن يخرجنا مما تنبت الأرض من بقلها وقثائها وفومها وعدسها إلى آخره. Right? They said, Musa, we cannot be patient with one type of food all the time. We're going to eat just one type of food all the time. Call on your Lord so that he can allow us to benefit from some of what the earth produces of lentils and onions and, and all of the different things that the cucumbers and things like this that the earth produces. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to them, قَالَ أَتَسْتَبْدِلُونَ الَّذِي هُوَ أَدْنَى بِالَّذِي هُوَ خَيْرٌ. Will you trade that which is greater than for that which is less than? Will you trade? These are concepts. When we read the Quran, we have to be able to deduce concepts, world concepts that we can take with us no matter where we go on our journey in this human experience. He said, will you trade that which is greater than for that which is less than? Will you opt for that which is mediocre and we have given you something that is greater? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wasn't trying to deny them the food of the earth. Allah was trying to condition them to be patient with the things that He has chosen for them. All right? We say that we make istikhara, right? I'm going to pray to God for His decision. But when God chooses for us, we choose something else. We choose something else. And we say, well, I prayed on it. No, you prayed on it, but you still went after what you want. And you didn't wait for God's decision. You didn't wait for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to decide for you. And sometimes when Allah does decide for us, we decide something else for ourselves. We decide something else for ourselves. So the Prophet ﷺ asked Rabi'a, أَوَ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ, is there anything else you want? And Rabi'a said no. Here's the key. The Prophet ﷺ said, فَأَعِنِّي عَلَى نَفْسِكَ بِكَثْرَةُ السُّجُودِ. He said, help you by making much sujood, meaning by praying a lot. Staying on top of your prayers and doing extra additional prayers, voluntary prayers. Do more prayers, because the more you do, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you, right? The more gratitude you show Allah, the more that Allah will give you. In shakaratum la azidannakum, that if you show gratitude to me, I will give you more. right? The more you do, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you, all right? The concept from this comment, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's words was so profound. He said, "A'inni ala nafsika," help me help you. Meaning, the only way that someone can help you is when you help you first. You have to help you. We sit around and we wait for everybody else to help us instead of us taking the initiative and helping yourself first. We sit around and we wait for everybody else to do for us instead of doing for yourself. Stop waiting for somebody to validate you, because you're going to be standing there waiting forever. You're waiting there with your arms out, hoping that the person sees you. And unfortunately, sometimes this is the person that is closest to you, your spouse, sometimes your own husband. You're waiting for that validation. You're waiting for that moment when he validates you. And you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and the validation never comes. And the fact of the matter is that you could have validated yourself a long time ago. You could have validated yourself a long time ago. But instead, you're sitting around waiting for someone else to validate you. The Prophet ﷺ said, "A'inni ala nafsika bi kathrati sujud." Help me help you. Meaning, you got to help yourself first. I cannot help you until you begin to help yourself first. Stop making everybody else a priority and make yourself a priority. Help yourself first. All right? This same concept that I say all the time is that same concept that I state all the time is that you can't get someone else to love you if you don't love yourself first. A person is not going to love you when they see that you don't love yourself. We're steady calling out to other people to love me, to see me, right? And you don't see yourself. You don't love yourself. People are naturally drawn to people who are very self-confident. We're naturally drawn to confidence because most of the time we're not confident ourselves. We're not confident ourselves, many of us. So naturally, when we see somebody that's very extremely confident in themselves, we're sucked into them, right? It's the gravitational pull towards that energy that we believe is stronger than the energy that we have for ourselves. That's just how it goes. So when the Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Help me help you," meaning I cannot do for you anything until you do for yourself. Until you do for you. You can help me to help you by making more prayers. Bikathratu sujud, by making more sujud. I came across this, I mentioned this hadith before, but never did I concentrate on this point. All right? Sometimes, the world has a way of, or your experiences have a way of making Islam so much more real to you. Right? When you don't have a lot of world experiences, your interaction with this religion of Islam will be very limited because your experiences are very limited. When you look at the Quran and how the Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, it was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ incident by incident. Every time an incident happened, there were ayats revealed, regarding that particular incident. That is the way that the Quran should be used in our lives. So the more and more world life experiences we have, the more the Quran becomes relevant to us. And so while we're memorizing the Quran, while we're learning the Quran, the tafsir, it's all theory. It's all theory until you begin to apply that to your life experiences. And if you have very little, very few, very limited life experiences, the Quran is not going to make much sense to you. You follow me? The Quran is not going to make much sense to you. All right? And this is why you have brothers and sisters who use Quranic ayats and hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in such a shallow manner. You look at their application of the ayats, you have conversations with people and they're using an ayat for this or they're using a hadith for that. And you're saying to yourself, that's all you see from that? It's so much more in there, but you can't see it because you don't have the world experiences. You don't have the life experiences that makes it relevant. You don't have the life experiences that make it. We create bubbles for ourselves, and we live in this little bubble, and then we take ayats and hadith and we're applying them to us on such a very shallow level. But the more and more you have life experiences, the more and more the Quran and Sunnah become relevant to you. And the deeper you're able to go with it because of the experiences that you're having. I'll give you an example of this and then we'll conclude and we'll open it up for questions and answers. When the Prophet ﷺ died, right? When the Prophet ﷺ died, Abu Bakr got on the minbar and he said that whoever used to worship Muhammad, Muhammad is dead. Man kana ya'budu Muhammadan fa inna Muhammad qad mata. Whoever used to worship Muhammad, then Muhammad is dead. He said, وَمَنْ كَانَ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ حَيٌّ لَا يَمُوتُ. And whoever used to worship Allah, whoever used to worship God, who was in it for God, right? Not for the personality of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you're in it for God, then God is ever living. He never dies. Meaning your mission doesn't stop with the death of Muhammad. Your issue doesn't stop with the death of Muhammad. Your issue or your mission stops when you are deceased. And then he quoted a verse from the Quran, so profound that Abu Bakr in that moment was able to reach into the Quran, 6,000 and some odd ayats in the Quran, and he was able to reach into the Quran and pull out this one verse that was so relevant to that situation. And he quoted the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انْقَلَبْتُمْ عَلَىٰ أَعْقَابِكُمْ وَمَنْ يَنْقَلِبْ عَلَىٰ عَقِبَيْهِ فَلَنْ يَضُرَّ اللَّهَ شَيْئًا وَسَيَجْزِي اللَّهُ الشَّاكِرِينَ. Ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Muhammad is nothing more than a messenger. Many messengers have come before him. If he dies or is killed, will you turn on your heels? And whoever turns on their heels will not harm God in the least, and Allah will reward those who are grateful. That was the ayah that he quoted. So relevant to that situation. But, I mean, you think about the fiqh, the understanding of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, for him to be able, in that very moment, which is the most difficult thing to do, under that type of stress, under that type of pressure, to be able to reach into the Quran, 6,000 and some odd ayats in the Quran, from Al-Fatiha to Nas, and be able to reach into the Quran and pull out this one verse and apply it to that particular situation. That is what you call, brothers and sisters, fiqh fit deen. Understanding of religion. Understanding of religion. Deep understanding of religion. Now you're able to go into the Quran and pull out a verse that is applicable to that particular situation. Umar radiallahu anhu, when he heard Abu Bakr quote this verse, he said, كَأَنَّهُ أَوَّلُ مَرَّةٍ سِمِعْتُ هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ. Umar radiallahu anhu, he said it was as if this was the first time I had ever heard this ayah in my life. What did Umar mean by that? This wasn't the first time. He said it's as if, كَأَنَّهُ, it's as if this was the first time I had ever heard that ayah in my life. Why? Because that situation now gave the verse relevance. It's just a verse. You memorize it, you store it in your subconscious, you memorize it, you recite it in the salat when it's, when you want to, all right, and it just lingers there. Then a situation arises where that verse is applicable to that situation and it now makes sense to you on a particular level. You understand? Then it makes sense to you on a particular level. But if you're not having life experiences, all right, or you are having life experiences, but you are not infusing your religion into your life experiences, then the Quran and the Sunnah is never going to make sense to you, except on a very surface level. So my point behind this discussion is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ to Ka'b, Rabi' ibn Ka'b. He said, "A'inni ala nafsika bi kathratu sujud." Help me, help you, right? You got to help you first. Help me, help you, right? You want my help, but you have to help yourself first. Help me, help you by making an abundance of prayers. That's the only way I can assist you. You got to remain steadfast on your prayers and you have to do more. And in that situation, I can help you become my companion in Jannah. I can help you become my companion in Jannah, but you got to help you. So my point behind this is for women, stop making other people a priority in your life when to them, you are only an option. They can choose to love you. They can choose to stay with you. They can choose to see you. They can choose to validate you. You are always an option. But for them, they are the top priority of your life. There is no option when it comes to loving them. You have to love them. You must love them. There is no option when it comes to validating them. You have to validate them. You have to, you know what I mean? Like, you must validate them. And that's all in your mind. You believe this. You've told yourself this. That they are top priority in your life while you are just an option for them. You guys follow me? You guys understand this concept? Put yourself first. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing selfish about that. Putting yourself first, that is how you validate yourself without seeking validation from anyone or anything outside of yourself. The Prophet ﷺ said, help me help you. I cannot help you until you help yourself. No one is going to love you if you don't love yourself. You're constantly trying to get this person to love you, constantly trying to get this person to see you, and they never do. Why? Because they see a weakness in you. They see that you don't love yourself. So they're going to constantly keep taking from you, draining the energy from you. But when you start pouring that energy back into yourself, right, then you guys are now on an equal playing field. You see how that works? You're here when you don't love yourself. This person, your spouse, your friends, they love themselves. They see themselves as being valid. You don't, but you seek validation through loving them. So through loving them, you feel like you are loved. And there's always going to be this disparity, right? There's always going to be this emotional disparity, this gap between you and that person until you begin to take the energy that you invest in other people and you begin investing that in yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you don't need anybody's permission to do that. We believe that we have to ask people permission to love ourselves. We live in a world where we believe we have to ask people permission to do something nice for ourselves, to do something for ourselves, to love ourselves, to validate ourselves. You don't need anybody's permission to validate yourself. Sister, please mute your mic. Please mute your mic. Sister Nisa, can you remove that person? Is there any way that you can find whose mic is unmuted and remove them from the line, please?
Okay, I'm just going to tell again to sisters, please mute your phone on *6. This call is being streamed live, and everyone, please be conscious that we cannot have any background noise when the class is going on. It's very important to have your phone muted, so we'll be able to take advantage of the imam and everyone can hear, please. Thank you.
So
I have to find out how to take people off. I don't know how to do that right now. Inshallah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So in conclusion, I'm just hoping that this concept is understood, right? And this quote is actually, never make someone else a priority when you are to them just an option. This is actually a quote from Maya Angelou. This is actually Maya Angelou's quote. I just thought it to be relevant to what we're talking about today. All right. Some people actually believe that the power in the relationship belongs to whoever cares the least. That's the truth. And that's in a situation where the person, here again, you are a priority to me, but to me, I'm just an option to you. Then that means that you are more powerful in the relationship because I'm going to constantly chase you, right? Because to me, you are a priority, and you're going to constantly feel like you can throw me away at any moment because to you, I'm just an option. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that, when I say that the person is powerful, that means that they can just walk away. That actually means that they're irresponsible because they don't feel like they're connected to anything or anyone. They can just get up and walk away from a situation. Whereas you You feel like, no, I can't just walk away from my marriage. I can't just walk away from my relationship. All right, it's deeper than that. So when we talk about who has power in the relationship, that power actually equates to irresponsibility. All right, so we'll, unmute the line, and, whoever has any questions, inshallah ta'ala, we'll take the time out. I just hope that everybody grasps the concept. The most important thing is the concept. Understanding the concept. Stop making other people a priority in your life, while to them you are just an option. The Prophet ﷺ told Rabi'a ibn Ka'b, help me help you by making more prayers. By making an abundance of prayers. Meaning, I can only help you as much as you help yourself. A person can only love you as much as you love yourself. If you don't love yourself, how can you expect somebody else to love you? If you don't see yourself as being valid, how can you expect someone else to validate you? And don't ask someone to do something that you can do yourself. You're asking your spouse to validate you when you can validate you. And you can leave your spouse to just be your spouse. Some of us enter into relationships and we have to become more than just a husband or wife in the relationship. We have to become more than that. And that's not fair, because everyone is not built to be more. Some of us are not even built to just be husbands and husbands and wives, let alone being more than that in a relationship. Naam.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Okay. I just wanted to have a question about something that you said. You said that that we have to condition ourselves to be patient with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for us, which is a concept that I've heard and understand and try to incorporate. But with the process of seeking and stuff, understanding that I've broadened my whole way of searching or looking, I opened my mind to people and circumstances that I wouldn't normally exactly consider, because I'm not trying to be so particular in that extreme regard, but of course something that's just okay enough. But when I think about that, I think about how you can have an option that's not the best option for you. Like, you wouldn't have chosen that person. You feel like you're compromising yourself. But then at the same time, I'm trying to wonder, is this what Allah is choosing for me? Like, and I'm feeling like, okay, so I already know that I'm not going to get something perfect. I'm not going to just psych myself up high for something. At the same time, I'm okay with settling to a certain extent, but then how do you know if you're settling and you're not supposed to be? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I got you. I overstand you.
Yeah.
I overstand you. How do you know that something is God's choice for you? All right, are we, sitting back, making istikhara, and then sitting back, waiting for some decision to fall out of the sky, fall right in our lap, and then we say, oh, wait, this is what God selected for me? How do you know that the situation that is in front of you is a situation that God chose for you, or something that you are choosing for yourself? And in some instances, choosing for yourself may seem like you are lowering your standards to have a situation. Trust and believe. Let me explain something to you, how istikhara works. Istikhara works, you seek Allah's decision after you have already made your decision. You understand how that works? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. When you have made your decision, then put your trust in Allah. So we do not sit back. We do not make istikhara and sit back and say, well, let me wait and see how this plays out. Let me see what Allah is going to just choose for me. It doesn't work like that. You as a human being go after what you believe using your values. You lead with your value system. All right, you are selecting a spouse, you are engaging in a relationship, you are going after a job, pursuing anything that you are pursuing, right? Leading with your value system. That's what you lead with, what your values are. The type of job you select for yourself, the type of spouse that you select for yourself, all of that should be based upon your values. The things that you consider important to you in your life, both morally as well as spiritually. All right. You lead with your value system. All right. Then once you go after that, you pursue something, then you ask God for his decision. This is where the tricky part comes in, because we have already invested in a situation, right? We've already invested in a situation more than we are supposed to. We invest emotionally in a situation when you shouldn't be investing emotionally in a situation. You should only be investing intellectually in a situation. We lead with our intellect, not with our heart. You don't lead with your heart in Islam. You lead with your intellect, which is why the wali is supposed to be there to stop you, to protect you from leading with your heart. But we do it all the time. We have intercourse with the person before we get married to them. We're sharing intimate, things about ourselves with the person before we marry to. We lead with emotion. We lead with our hearts, and it gets us in trouble every single time, because once Allah starts to show us signs that this is not for us, we ignore the signs that Allah shows us, and we continue on in our pursuit of that thing. You understand? We lead with our heart. This is why we don't fall in love with a person before we decide to marry them. I just talked about this yesterday. And while we think that our system is, for lack of better words, backwards and antiquated, we oftentimes look at Islam and we say, well, how in the world are you supposed to fall in love with someone and he's a complete stranger or she's a complete stranger? The non-Muslims, they have 2, 3, 4 year relationships and they fall in love and then they get married. That's backwards. That is actually backwards, right? Because you lead with your heart. Right? Before you start to use your intellect and see the person for who they really are. You're all in this lovey-dovey relationship, emotionally overwhelmed with this person. And so much so that you are inundated, right? With, your own, emotions and your feelings, that you can't see the person for who they really are. Whereas in Islam, we don't lead with our heart. We lead with our intellect. We lead with our intellect. Which is why the woman covers, which is why she covers her body, so that when men are interested in them, you're not interested in them initially based upon their physical appearance. You want to see what is here. But when we have sit downs with brothers and sisters, when this sit down process begins, we could care less how intellectual you are. We could care less about, we want to know, how thick you are, how cute you are, what you look like under your niqab if you wear a fake. You understand what I'm saying? That's what we lead with. That's what we lead with. And it gets us in trouble every single time, because once the signs become apparent to us that this situation is not for us, we pursue it anyway, despite the fact that Allah has chosen otherwise for us. And then we say, how do I know whether or not this is a situation that God chose for me or a situation that I chose for myself? You go after the situation. Once Allah makes it clear to you that this person is clearly not for you, then if you persist in the situation, then that's a decision you chose for yourself. If you stop and you desist and you say, you know what, nah, I'm good, I've seen too much, then you know that you have chosen what God has chosen for you. But that can only happen when you lead with your intellect. You can't lead with your heart and expect to come out a winner in the situation. You lead with your emotion, you lead with your feelings, you are going to end up hurt every single time, because the key things that you need to see, you can't see while you're drunk. You understand? When you're intoxicated with emotion, intoxicated with oxytocin, you're intoxicated with dopamine, you're intoxicated with all of these chemicals that your body releases when you are engaging in a relationship with a person at the very beginning stages. You are intoxicated, you're drunk, and you're about to make a lifetime decision to be with this person, to marry this person while you are intoxicated. And then after you marry the person and the drugs wear off, and now you can see the person for who they are, you're saying to yourself, how in the hell did I end up with this person? Because you made decisions while you were intoxicated.
Yeah, I understand.
So the point is, how do you know when you have chosen for yourself or when you have chosen what God has chosen for you? Is that when you pursue something and then you make istikhara, you ask Allah for his decision. You don't ask Allah for his decision beforehand. You pursue something. This is what you want. You go after what you want. You pursue that thing. And then you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide your decision. And if it is something that is for you, Allah will facilitate it for you in a manner that is easy. Allah will facilitate it for you in a manner that is fruitful. Even if it turns out not to work out for you, Allah facilitated the situation for you because there was a deeper lesson in it for you. It wasn't the relationship. All right, there were lessons in that situation that were for you. Allah just used the relationship between you and him to show you those lessons. You understand? Some people are a lesson for you. You understand? Some people are a lesson for you. They were not your spouse. You were married to the person, but the person in your life clearly and only represented a lesson for you. That's it. And sometimes it happens through relationships. Some people are just clearly lessons for you. And then there's some people who the situation works out and, it's clearly clearly something that, and I mean, in both situations, is what God chose for you. In both situations. But we have to learn how to yield. We don't yield. We don't yield to the signs that Allah is showing us. We don't yield. We see the signs clearly and we continue on in our pursuit. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts to expose things to you about the person that you are in a relationship with, a person you're about to go into a relationship with, yield to those signs. It's just like riding on a highway and the sign says yield and you keep going 60 miles an hour, you're going to crash into somebody else. You didn't follow the signs. The sign says stop. If you don't stop at the stop sign, you're going to go past and you're going to crash into somebody else. And here we are, Muslims, who are supposed to be the most God-conscious people on the face of the earth, and we're constantly crashing into one another. Accident after accident after accident, simply because we don't yield to the signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us. And Allah knows best. Is there anyone else that has a question? Ameen, Ya Rabb. And you too. Any other questions?
Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Yes, I was listening to one of your lectures, an old one, and I can't find it now, where you were addressing the dyeing of the hair. Can you go over that again for women?
The dyeing of the hair?
Yes.
Okay. There are some scholars, I don't really see the relevance in that in what we're talking about right now. We really prefer for the questions to be related to the topic, honestly. Because sometimes you ask a question and it catches me off guard and I'm really just not prepared to respond to it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No worries. But the scholars in general, they say that, and obviously when scholars are responding to these things, they're responding from their own paradigm. When we translate fatwa, we translate Islamic rulings and verdicts and edicts, and we translate them into English. All right, those rulings were given, although by Islamic scholars, by every sense of the word, right? But at the same token, they're speaking from a particular paradigm, without a doubt. So if they are, scholars in Saudi Arabia, when they respond to a lot of the fatwa that they're responding to it from their paradigm, from where they are in Saudi Arabia. And of course, they factor in all of the laws and the rules and everything else. And no one can tell me that a scholar responds to a question or answers a question and there is no cognitive bias, connected to that. There's naturally a cognitive bias. There's a bias to, your position, to your understanding, your paradigm. And that's, just human. So when a scholar from Saudi Arabia is asked a question from someone in America about dyeing their hair, and they say that it's haram to dye your hair, that if your hair is black, it is haram for you to dye it any other color. And if your hair is not black, it's haram to dye it black. That is generally the fatwa or the general ruling regarding that if your hair is black, then you should not dye it another color. Now, when you think about that, when you think about Arab women, what color is Arab women hair? Arab women don't usually come blonde or redhead. They don't come like that. They inbreed. So the gene is the same, generation after generation after generation. So you're not gonna have blonde hair Arabs. You're not gonna have, and I'm talking about pretty much the Gulf states. I'm not talking about other Beirut. I'm not talking about other places beyond that, Lebanon, Lebanon. I'm not talking about other places. All right, they outbreed, so they marry outside of their culture. They marry people outside of. I'm talking about in Saudi Arabia in particular. They usually inbreed. They don't marry outside of their family unit. All right. Cousins marry cousins, distant first, second cousins marry first, second cousins. That's usually how. So there's a lot of inbreeding that go on. So Arab women usually have black hair. And that in Arab culture is seen as a sign of beauty. In Arab culture, that's seen as a sign of beauty, which is why the Prophet ﷺ said, don't dye the hair. If it's black, don't dye it any other color, because that was seen as a standard of beauty in Arabia. All right. A lot of things are culturally, embedded in their culture. You understand? And we don't factor that in. And that's not to say that all of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is strictly based upon his culture. No, that's not the case. All right. There were some things that were cultural that he addressed, and there were some things that were in general and applies to the ummah as a whole. All right. But there are some things that, definitely, without a doubt, is cultural. All right, when the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with some of his companions, and one of them was eating lizard, and he offered the Prophet ﷺ some, and the Prophet said, no, I don't want it. And then the man asked the Prophet ﷺ, well, is it eating lizard, is it haram? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, it's not haram. It's not my preference. It's not the food of my people. We, the people of Quraysh and Mecca, we don't eat lizard. You understand? So he wasn't denying it based upon the fact that it was legislatively haram. He was denying it based upon the fact that culturally, I don't eat that. All right. So if someone says, okay, let's eat lamb because this was the meat of the Prophet ﷺ, but I don't necessarily eat lamb. I'm not a red meat eater. You understand? You cannot use that to force or superimpose that on me, because that's not legislatively, you understand, haram or halal. All right. So when the Prophet ﷺ said that, don't dye the hair black, meaning that if the hair is not black, do not dye it black. All right. To give the impression that that is the color of your hair. All right. That is not the natural color of your hair. Then keep it the natural color that it is. And if your hair is black, do not dye it any other color, because black was seen as a standard of beauty. All right. Now, fast forward to, 2018, where you got women having pink hair, women having blonde hair, women having, other different, there's a variety of, different standards of beauty here in our society. Some women are going natural because they're trying to combat, the straight hair and, this white supremacist systematic, standard of beauty that have been placed in front of us, that has caused many, women, especially African Americans, to deny their own culture, to deny the essence of who they are. All right. So you have, something that is, women are resisting that. And then you have women who are just, being creative with their hair. No, hair dye doesn't necessarily make your hair fall out. Don't use general blanket statements like that. Dyeing your hair does not make your hair fall out, with all due respect. Okay. But at the same token, I cannot say that a woman dyeing her hair, I won't say that a woman dyeing her hair a different color is haram. All right. It's cultural. It's like, getting, piercings. Scholars say that piercings are not haram. If a woman wants to get a nose pierced, or her ears, multiple piercings on her ear, and obviously some things that are just kind of over, are beyond, the ear where they have the earlobe and, there's a huge circle. Obviously that would be a bit extreme, because now you're talking about, damaging skin, when you take the earring out, the skin is dragging and things like that. That's not the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, creating, not the way that Allah created us. But I don't want to segue into that. I don't want to go deeper into the whole concept or the whole subject matter of dyeing the hair. Because the fact of the matter is, even if I said it was haram, most of you are going to do what you want to do anyway. It doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Like, we're just asking, we're just throwing around, the theory of it. But the fact of the matter is that even if it was clear that to dye your hair any other color other than what it is would be haram, women are still going to do what they want to do anyway. So, I mean, for clarification purposes, okay. Now, any other questions? Please keep your questions related to the topic, inshallah.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I had a quick question. So you talked a lot about validating yourself and kind of building that self-confidence within yourself. Can you kind of give us some practical tips on how we can sort of put that into practice in our lives?
Okay, so let's talk about practically, how do you go about validating yourself? How do you go about getting the validation that you need from yourself? All right, self-validating. All right, validation goes back to childhood. Let's make that clear. All right, there were things, some of us grew up in big families, and we fell in maybe a middle child or the oldest child or the last child, and for some reason we felt like the validation that we needed from our family, because that's usually where it starts. If the parents give the children the adequate attention that they need and the validation that they need, you understand, then they don't need to go out into the world looking for validation. They can find it within themselves, because the foundation of their self-validation has already been given to them through their parents. So a lot of that starts with, what we feel that our parents, what we feel our parents failed us in. All right. So part of that validation could be to go back and confront your parents about why, they didn't give you the validation that you felt that you needed. Or you already come into that conclusion. Some of us, we don't need to necessarily go back to our parents. We get it. We figure it out. We're adults. We have reached a point in our lives where we get it, But to close off that, to bring closure to that, to have that conversation with your dad, right? If your dad didn't give you the validation that you needed as a girl, or as a boy, your mom didn't give you the validation that you need. A lot of that stuff stems from childhood. A lot of the things that we deal with in adulthood stems from childhood. All right? So going back and confronting, your parents about, those things, and then beginning to look at what exactly do you need to feel whole? What do you need to feel validated? All right. Is it a pat on the back that when you did something right or you did something good, you're looking for someone to kind of champion you, to say, hey, you did a good job? All right. Sometimes you can do that yourself. You can say to yourself, I did a good job. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing arrogant about that or narcissistic about that. To give yourself a pat on the back and to reward yourself. Reward yourself for doing something, for achieving accomplishments, setting smaller goals for yourself that you can accomplish. And every time you accomplish those goals, then you reward yourself for that. Becoming your own cheerleader. Thank you. Very good. There's nothing wrong with that. Set small goals for yourself. Stop setting these huge goals. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to open my own business. Okay, start small. How is that going to happen? What's the first step? All right, break it down into steps. Achievable, attainable steps. And each time you attain a goal that leads up to the end goal for you, then you reward yourself for that. And you don't need somebody alongside of you cheerleading you on, championing you, although that would be good. But some of us, we're married to people who could care less. They have their own lives. They have their own things that's important to them. And, we can't superimpose on someone else's life to say, hey, look at me. I'm over here. See me. I'm right here. See me. You understand? Maybe they're searching for validation for themselves as well. So essentially, you're asking of your spouse something that they can't give to you. We're all in these situations, man, hurt, broken, disappointed, suffering from so much. And it's like we're in a relationship with people and we're superimposing on them to see us, to validate us, when they're actually looking for validation themselves. So I think, a key, component in that is to look at yourself and ask yourself, what do I need to feel whole? What do I need to feel on par with, everyone else? What do I need to feel, valid? What do I need? Because some of us, quite frankly, we don't really know what we need. You find people who, start this endeavor, start that endeavor, start this, start that, and they're starting all different things, believing that this is what's going to make them feel valid. This is what's going to make them feel valid. And they never achieve anything because they still have not identified where the validation lies in. So they try their hand in this, they try their hand in that, they try their hand in this, looking for what actually makes them feel valid when you have never finished anything because you have never sat down to figure out what exactly do you need to feel valid. Do you need verbal, confirmation? Do you need someone to tell you that you're beautiful? Is that what it is? If it's, you don't feel beautiful, maybe your parents didn't tell you, or maybe you got teased, or maybe you got bullied at school or whatever, and people told you weren't pretty, you weren't beautiful, you weren't this, you weren't that, then you need to reverse that. And you need to start having self-talk, positive self-talk, telling yourself, I am beautiful, telling yourself that I am successful, telling yourself that I can do this. You need to reverse that process. You know what I mean? Identify the problem and accepting it before trying to tackle it. Very good. Thank you for simplifying that. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you got to look at, where is the piece of the puzzle in your life missing? Where's the piece of the puzzle missing? And because people think that, if I could only get my spouse to do this for me, I would feel whole. I would feel validated. And then when the spouse does that, you still feel empty. Because you still have not really identified where your invalidation, is coming from. Or even if you are invalid. Because a lot of times it's what people have told us. Ideas that people have put in our minds about ourselves. So you have to now begin to start having real conversations with yourself. Positive self-talk. Now, and I hope that helps. I got time for one more question, inshallah, and then we'll conclude. One more question, and then we'll stop. Okay. If there are no more questions, then we'll stop here, inshallah.
Can I ask one quick question?
Hold on. Someone online says, when you see signs, how fast do you divorce? That's a very vague question. I don't really, you have to explain that. When you start seeing signs that this is the person that is not for you, how fast do you divorce? Only you can decide that. How do you know that divorce is actually the remedy to that? How do you just go from, I see signs that we're not meant to be together, let's divorce? How do you go from point A to point Z? You know what I mean? Like, how do you figure that divorce is the solution to that? Go ahead, sis. Ask your question.
I remember you had a lecture around during Ramadan, and you were talking about, because you mentioned that in this lecture about love yourself and make more prayer and worship for the things that you need so that you can get the reward, inshallah. And I remember you said before that charitable deeds are only really rewarded when they're done for a Muslim. I don't know if that may be wrong.
No, that's not true. Charitable deeds are only rewarded when you do it for a Muslim? No way. I hope I didn't say that.
I don't know if you said you were saying something about, someone must have asked that. And
no.
I don't know if that's what said.
No.
Okay, I don't do that. That's not a practice that I do, but I just wondered if that was something that I heard before.
No, charitable deeds are not only rewarded when you do them for people who are Muslim. You can do, giving dawah is a charitable deed, and we give dawah to Muslims as well as non-Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ said that if Allah was to guide one person by your hands, it would be better for you than everything that the sun has risen over. So you're going to actually essentially get rewarded for being doing a charitable deed to someone who is not even a Muslim. There's no way that, in Islam, the only way that you will be rewarded for charitable deeds is if you do it for a non-Muslim. Do it for a Muslim. No way. I pray that that's not something that I said. And if I did say it, I stand corrected. No, that's not correct.
Okay.
Naam, inshallah. You guys have been great. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all for your listening. And we pray that, there was some benefit in what we, for those of you who still have questions, I'm sorry, we're going to conclude here. You can email me your questions, inshallah, or you can wait until the next session, and then we'll try to tackle those questions, bi'idhnillah. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Wa alaikum assalam. You for the call, Imam Shadid.
No problem.